The Grand Chamber of the Theron Accord had hosted 400 years of diplomacy without a single walkout. That record ended on a Tuesday, ship time, when Ambassador Grace Holloway stood up, closed her tablet with a soft click, and said, "We're done here." The chamber fell silent. 17 species occupied the tiered seating, their translators humming faint static as they processed the sentence. At the center dais, High Speaker Asen Vale of the Theron Council tilted his elongated head, mandibles clicking in something between confusion and offense. "Ambassador Holloway," Vale said, his translated voice smooth and unbothered, "we have not concluded the session. The matter of the Corvid Belt border dispute remains unresolved." "No," Grace said. "It's resolved. You resolved it 3 weeks ago when your survey ships crossed into the Sol perimeter without clearance, and your council called it an administrative oversight." She let the words sit. "We don't do business with people who think an act of war is a paperwork error." A murmur rippled through the chamber, not human sound, but the equivalent in a dozen different physiologies. The Theron had built their reputation on patience, on outlasting every species that had ever sat across from them at a table. Patience was their weapon. They had never met a species that simply refused to keep playing. Grace gathered her files. Beside her, Colonel Wade Lindqvist rose without a word, tucked his cap under his arm, and followed her toward the exit. Neither of them looked back. The council convened in an emergency session 4 hours later, Human Standard Hours, a unit they'd adopted decades ago because, annoyingly, it was efficient. "They cannot simply leave," said Councillor Ithrasenik of the Volmiri Compact, her 4 eyes blinking out of sync in agitation. 41 species have signed the Theron Accord. None have withdrawn mid-session in living memory. "They are not withdrawing from the Accord," Vale corrected, studying a data slate with more attention than the topic seemed to warrant. "They are withdrawing from these talks. There is a difference, and I suspect it is a deliberate one." "Semantics," Senek snapped. "Strategy," Vale said quietly. Across the chamber, a smaller delegate, a Corvid representative named Thesic, gray-skinned and nervous, the species whose disputed border had started all of it, shifted in his seat. "Perhaps we simply apologize, reconvene, offer concessions on the survey incident." "They will not answer," Vale said. "You don't know that." "I do," Vale said, and something in his voice made the chamber go quiet again. "Because I have read their history. Humanity does not walk away from tables where they still believe something can be gained. They walk away when they've already decided what happens next, and they no longer feel obligated to explain it to us." Thesic's throat sac fluttered. "That sounds like a threat." "It is not a threat," Vale said. "A threat is a message. This is silence. Silences are worse." 3 days passed. The Theron sent formal correspondence to the Sol delegation. Polite, procedural, requesting a resumption of talks. No response came. On the 4th day, Theron long-range sensors picked up movement along the Corvid Belt. Not warships. Something stranger, a slow, deliberate line of unarmed survey and engineering vessels, humanity's civilian fleet, moving with escort but not aggression, establishing a visible, undeniable presence exactly along the boundary the Theron survey ships had crossed 3 weeks before. No weapons were fired. No demands were issued. Humanity simply parked itself on the line and stayed there, in full view of every sensor array in the sector, saying nothing at all. "It's a blockade," Senek insisted, pacing the observation deck. "A soft one, but a blockade." "It is a fence," Vale said, watching the tactical display. "They are telling us where the line is. Not asking, telling. Then we push back. We move our own ships to the boundary. Match their presence. Show we will not be dictated to." Vale was quiet for a long moment. "Counselor, may I tell you something about humans that our historians have understood for decades, but our diplomats consistently forget?" Senek stopped pacing. "They spent most of their history at war with themselves," Vale said. "Different nations, different tribes, entire continents of them, for thousands of years, fighting over lines drawn on maps. And in all that time, they learned something the rest of us never had to learn, because none of our species ever came that close to erasing itself." He turned from the display. They learned exactly how far a line can be pushed before it breaks. And they learned to never, ever draw a line they weren't prepared to enforce. So you're saying? I'm saying if we send ships to that boundary, we are not testing their resolve. We are finding out, for the first time in 400 years, what it costs to test it. Nobody sent ships. Instead, on the 7th day, the Theron Council did something it had not done since Vale had taken his seat. It convened a private session, no other species present, no recordings, no translation logs. Just the 7 high speakers, alone, arguing in their own tongue about a species that hadn't fired a single shot and had somehow made an entire Galactic Council afraid to move a supply vessel across a border. It was Vale who finally proposed the solution nobody wanted to say aloud. We go to them, he said. Not a summons. Not a formal request through channels. I go to Earth. Alone if necessary. And I do not bring a negotiating position. I apologize. The Council does not apologize, Senex said. But there was no conviction left in it. The Council, Vale said, has never had to. That was the mistake. We assumed the talks would always continue because they always had. We treated an act of war as an inconvenience because no one had ever made us feel the difference. He stood. I would like to stop being the species that has to be taught the difference the hard way. Grace Holloway met him in a conference room in Geneva that still had a window, an actual glass window, overlooking a gray autumn lake because someone on the Earth diplomatic staff had decided that if the Theron wanted an audience, they'd get one on human terms in a human room with human weather outside. Vale arrived without an entourage. He sat across from her and said nothing for a long moment, and Grace let him have the silence, because she understood now that silence, for his species, cost something. The survey incursion was not an accident, Vale said finally. It was authorized by a subcommittee that believed your border enforcement to be theoretical. A courtesy line, not a real one. He folded his long hands on the table. We were wrong. I am here to say that plainly, without a proposal attached to it, because I have come to understand that with your people, the apology has to come before the ask or it isn't real. Grace studied him for a long moment. Outside, wind moved across the lake. You know why we walked out, she said. It wasn't a question. Because we treated a violation as a formality. Because you assumed we'd keep talking no matter what you did, Grace said. That's the part that mattered. Not the border. The assumption. She leaned forward. We're not interested in being anyone's theoretical line, ambassador. We fought each other for 10,000 years to learn that lesson. We're not going to unlearn it for you. I understand that now, Vale said. Better than I did a week ago. Grace was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table and slid a single folder toward him. Not a treaty, not a demand. A simple document. Coordinates, protocols, a direct communication channel that bypassed the Council's committees entirely. Then we start over, she said. But this time, when we say a line is a line, you believe us the first time. Not after we have to prove it. Vale looked at the folder, then at her and inclined his head, the closest his species came to a bow. Agreed, he said. The Council will not make that mistake again. Grace almost smiled. Good, she said. Because we'd really rather not have to teach you twice. Outside, the wind kept moving across the lake, and for the first time in 400 years, the Theron Accord had a member who had walked away from the table and made the entire galaxy understand exactly why that mattered.